The heavy mahogany door of the pastor's study didn't creak, but the silence following the click of the lock felt deafening. Emma's fingers trembled as she pried up the false bottom of the desk, her breath hitching at the sight of foreign bank drafts and her own daughter's identity stamped onto documents for a shell company. Outside, the gravel crunched. A car door slammed with a finality that made her blood run cold. She had exactly 10 seconds to hide the evidence of $1 million betrayal before the man the town called a saint walked through that door. The shadow of her husband stretched across the hallway carpet, looming like a shroud. As the handle began to turn, Emma clutched a silver-framed wedding photo to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it felt like it might burst. She looked down at the image of their smiling faces, then at the stolen fortunes hidden beneath her feet. One wrong move, and she wouldn't just lose her marriage. She would lose her children to a man who had turned their very names into a criminal shield. The door swung open, and the scent of peppermint and cold rain filled the room. The teacup trembled in Mrs. Hargrove's grip, a fine crack running along the rim where her thumb pressed too hard. Emma reached out, fingers brushing the porcelain before the woman could spill another drop onto the lace tablecloth. "Here," she murmured, sliding a fresh cup across the polished mahogany. No gold trim this time, just the plain white set from the back of the cabinet. The one that didn't matter if it chipped. Mrs. Hargrove exhaled through her nose, the sound sharp as a needle. "You always know, don't you?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and Emma didn't answer. Instead, she poured, steam curling between them, carrying the scent of bergamot and something bitter beneath it, like burnt sugar left too long in the pan. The woman's hands shook again, this time not from the cup, but from the way her shoulders hunched, as if bracing for a blow. Outside, the church bells began their midday toll, the sound muffled by the thick curtains. Emma counted the strikes in her head, 1, 2, before Mrs. Hargrove's fingers tightened around the saucer. "They say the mill's closing by autumn. My boy's got no trade, no." Her breath hitched. A bead of sweat traced the line of her jaw, disappearing into the high collar of her dress. Emma set down the teapot. The clink of china against wood was too loud in the sudden quiet. She reached for the sugar bowl, her nails clicking against the silver tongs as she dropped 2 lumps into Mrs. Hargrove's cup. The woman watched, lips pressed thin. "You don't have to," she said. But her hand closed around the cup before Emma could pull it back. The first sip was noisy, unladylike. Emma didn't flinch. She knew the taste of desperation, how it coated the tongue like cheap wine, how it made a person forget manners. The clock on the mantel ticked, slow and deliberate. Somewhere in the kitchen, the scullery maid dropped a pot. The crash made Mrs. Hargrove jump, tea sloshing over the rim. Emma didn't move to wipe it. She just waited, her own cup untouched, the surface of the liquid still as glass. The afternoon sun of Greenville filtered through the garden's oaks, casting dappled patterns across the lawn where the parish ladies gathered. Emma smoothed the front of her white linen dress, her movements possessing a practiced, rhythmic grace. The fabric was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the humid Missouri air that carried the heavy, cloying scent of blooming jasmine and fresh-cut grass. She moved among the guests with a teapot in hand, a silent ghost of hospitality. "Another drop, Mrs. Baker? It helps with the joints, or so the doctor says." "The doctor says." Emma's voice was a low, melodic hum, designed to soothe, to fade into the background of a conversation. She leaned down, her fingers grazing the woman's wrist in a gesture of practiced empathy. Around her, the women of Greenville whispered their admirations, their eyes tracing the sharp, elegant line of her jaw and the flawless coil of her chestnut hair. To them, she was the icon of the parsonage. a living testament to the peace that came with a life surrendered to the pulpit. The piece, however, was a fragile glass ornament. A heavy hand landed on Emma's shoulder, the weight of it familiar and suffocating. David's presence always preceded his voice, a shift in the air that felt like a storm front moving in. He stood tall, his silver hair catching the light, his smile wide and magnanimous as he addressed the circle of women. "My Emma," David boomed, his voice a rich baritone that commanded the garden. "The Lord truly blessed this house with a spirit of such tireless devotion. I often tell her, a quiet heart is the greatest treasure a man can find. Isn't that right, ladies? Isn't that right?" The women nodded, their faces glowing with reflected piety. But as David spoke, his thumb found the soft dip of Emma's clavicle. He pressed down. The pain was sudden and white-hot, radiating through her shoulder. Emma's smile didn't falter. She had learned long ago that a flinch was an invitation for more. He leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear in what looked like a tender confidence. "There is a stain on the tablecloth, Emma," he whispered, his breath smelling of peppermint and something metallic. "Near the edge, a brown ring. You've become careless. Careless. Fix it before anyone else sees how you fail this house." He withdrew, his hand lingering just long enough to leave a dull ache in her bone. Emma turned back to the tea service, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird in a chimney. She saw the stain now, a tiny, insignificant circle of spilled Earl Grey. To David, it was a crack in the foundation of his empire. The guests eventually trickled away, leaving the house in a silence that felt heavier than the noise. Emma retreated to the kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath her shoes. David sat at the heavy oak table, the week's supermarket receipts spread before him like a deck of cards. He didn't look up as she entered. He simply traced a line on a slip of paper with a thick, blunt finger. "Organic milk, Emma?" He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "The store brand is $2 cheaper. $2. Why do you insist on wasting what the congregation provides? Do you think the widow's mites are meant to fund your vanity? Your vanity." "Lily needs the nutrients, David," she replied softly, her hands busy at the sink, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. "The doctor mentioned her iron levels were low." Low. David stood, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. He walked over to her, reaching into the small ceramic jar where she kept the household cash. He pulled out the remaining $20 bill, the only money she had left for the week's bread and eggs. He folded it neatly, tucking it into his breast pocket. "I will handle the shopping from now on," he said, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You clearly cannot be trusted with the stewardship of this family." Stewardship. He left the room without another word. Emma stayed by the sink until her hands were wrinkled and red from the hot water. The following morning, the reality of her isolation began to sharpen. She stood in the cramped, wood-paneled hallway of the Greenville Music School, the weight of Lily's cello case pulling at her arm. The air smelled of rosin and old carpet. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell," the instructor said, sliding the credit card back across the counter. "The terminal says it's declined." Declined. Emma felt the heat rise up her neck, a crimson tide of shame. She tried the card again, her fingers fumbling with the plastic. "There must be a mistake with the bank. I'll call them immediately." She hurried Lily out to the car, her mind racing. In the privacy of the driver's seat, she pulled up the banking app on her phone. Access denied. She tried the secondary account, the one meant for the children's college funds, the one she had painstakingly added to from her own small inheritance and years of penny pinching. The balance was 0. The numbers stared back at her, cold and mocking. 3 days ago, a total withdrawal. A transfer authorized by the primary account holder, David. She drove home in a trance, the streets of Greenville blurring past. The town was so beautiful, so orderly, with its white picket fences and blooming hydrangeas. But to Emma, it had become a labyrinth of locked doors. She waited until the house was empty, until the heavy thud of the front door signaled David's departure for the evening vestry meeting. The silence of the house was absolute, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Emma walked toward David's study. The door was locked, as always, a heavy slab of mahogany that guarded his secrets. She reached into her hair, pulling out a sturdy bobby pin. Her hands shook, but her mind was a cold, clear lake. She had watched him turn the key 1,000 times. She knew the sound of the tumblers. Click. The room smelled of expensive tobacco and the leather-bound commentaries that lined the walls. It was a masculine space, oppressive and dark. Emma moved to his desk, her knees hitting the plush carpet. She knew about the false bottom in the mahogany filing cabinet. She had seen him linger there once when he thought she was asleep. She pried at the seam, her nails catching on the wood. The panel popped open. Inside lay a stack of blue folders and a sheaf of thin, translucent paper. International bank drafts. Her eyes scanned the figures. Cayman Islands, Zurich. Transfers of 50,000, 80,000, 100,000. The dates matched the church's major capital campaigns, the new roof, the mission to Malawi, the youth center fund. All of it diverted. All of it signed with David's elegant, sweeping script. But it wasn't just the theft. She opened the blue folder labeled with Lily's name. Inside were corporate registration documents for a shell company based in Delaware. Her daughter's social security number was listed as the primary beneficiary. He was using their children as shields, weaving their identities into a web of financial crimes that would ensure they were ruined along with him if the truth ever surfaced. "You monster," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You monster." The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway shattered the quiet. Emma's heart leaped into her throat. The heavy, rhythmic thud of David's boots on the porch followed. She heard the rattle of keys. She had seconds. She shoved the folders back into the hidden compartment, her fingers flying. She grabbed a silver-framed photograph from the corner of the desk. A picture of their wedding day. She collapsed into his leather chair, bowing her head just as the door swung open. David stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light from the hall. He didn't move. He just watched her. "Why are you in here, Emma?" His voice was a low growl, the sound of a predator finding an intruder in its den. Emma looked up, her eyes brimming with genuine tears, tears of terror, though he couldn't know that. She clutched the wedding photo to her chest. I was feeling so lonely, David. Lonely. I missed the man in this picture. The man who used to look at me like I was the only thing in the world. I thought if I sat here in your space, I might find him again. Find him. David's expression softened, but his eyes remained sharp, searching her face for a lie. He walked toward her, his shadow stretching across the desk. He took the photo from her hands and set it down. "You are a sentimental creature, Emma," he said, his voice dropping to a patronizing silk. "But my study is not a place for your whims. It is a place of work, of God's work. Go to the kitchen. Mrs. Thompson is arriving early tomorrow. The house must be perfect. Perfect." He watched her leave, his gaze burning into her back. Emma didn't stop until she reached the safety of the bathroom, where she turned on the shower to drown out the sound of her own gasping breath. The next few days were a blur of calculated moves. Emma met Sarah, a sharp-eyed attorney she had known since childhood, in a neglected corner of the town park. The wind whistled through the rusted chains of the swings. "This is enough to bury him, Emma," Sarah whispered, looking over the blurred photos Emma had taken of the bank statements. "But he'll see it coming. He's powerful here. We need more. We need him on record." Sarah handed her a small black device, a digital recorder no larger than a thumb. "Hide this. Keep it on you. If he threatens you, if he admits to anything, hit the button." Emma tucked the recorder into the lining of her coat, the metal cold against her skin. But David was already tightening the noose. When she returned home, she found him in the living room, a drill in his hand. Black domes, security cameras, were being mounted in every corner of the ceiling. "For your safety, dear," he said, not looking at her. "There have been reports of prowlers, and I'll need your phone. The church is updating the encryption on all family devices. It's for the best, for the best." He held out his hand. Emma had no choice. She watched him take her only link to Sarah, her only window to the world. The house became a fortress. David hired Helen Thompson, a woman whose loyalty was bought with church funds and whose eyes were as cold as river stones, to act as a housekeeper. In reality, Helen was a jailer. She followed Emma from room to room, her heavy keys jingling at her waist like a warning. Emma's desperation reached a breaking point during a quiet afternoon in the study. She had managed to slip away from Helen, darting into the room to plant the recorder under David's desk. She was on her knees, the adhesive tape sticking to her trembling fingers, when the door creaked. She froze. A shadow fell across the carpet. "What are you doing, Emma?" It wasn't David. It was Helen. The woman stood there, her arms crossed, her face a mask of suspicion. "I dropped a button," Emma lied, her voice thinned by fear. "A pearl button from my sleeve. I thought it rolled under here." Rolled. Helen didn't move. "The pastor says you've been acting strange." "Strange? He says the stress of the ministry is getting to your head. Maybe you should go lie down." Emma scrambled up, the recorder hidden in her palm. She pushed past the woman, her heart hammering. But the reprieve was short-lived. That evening, David entered their bedroom with a thick, white envelope. "I spoke with Dr. Hammond today," David said, his voice flat. "He's concerned about these episodes you've been having, the paranoia, the wandering. He's signed a preliminary commitment, just for observation, of course. For your own good, your own good." Emma stared at the papers. It was a petition for psychiatric intervention. He was going to have her committed, to strip her of her children and her voice before she could speak a word of the truth. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I've already done it," David replied. He walked to the window, pulling the heavy velvet curtains shut. "The van will be here tomorrow night, after the gala. You'll stay here until then. Helen will ensure you don't overexert yourself." He locked the bedroom door from the outside. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room pressing in on her. She looked at the black coffer of Lily's cello in the corner. She remembered the day she had helped Lily pack it, how she had slipped a spare flash drive, a backup of the files she'd managed to copy, into the hidden pocket of the velvet lining. She moved with the silence of a shadow. She tied the bed sheets together, her knots clumsy but tight. She opened the window, the cool night air hitting her face like a benediction. She climbed out, the bricks scraping her palms, the Izumrudnoy silk of her gown, the dress David had forced her to wear for the gala, tearing as she descended. She hit the grass and ran. She reached the main road, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A passing pickup truck slowed, the driver looking at her with a mix of pity and confusion. "Please," she sobbed. "The church. Take me to the church." As the truck roared toward the center of Greenville, Emma saw the headlights in the rearview mirror. David's SUV. He was coming. The chase was a blur of screeching tires and blinding lights. David tried to ram them, his face a mask of demonic fury behind the glass. "Faster!" Emma screamed. The driver swerved, skidding into the church parking lot. Emma jumped out before the truck had even fully stopped. She sprinted for the side entrance, the heavy oak doors groaning as she threw herself inside. The church was packed. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. On the stage, David stood behind the pulpit, his voice echoing through the rafters. He was talking about her tragic decline, about the burden of love. Emma didn't go to the pews. She ran for the stairs, her bare feet slapping against the stone. She reached the media booth, the small room overlooking the sanctuary. A young technician started to rise, but Emma shoved him aside with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She fumbled with the flash drive, her fingers bloody. She found the port. On the giant screens behind David, the image changed. The promotional video of the church's charity work vanished. In its place appeared the bank statements, the offshore accounts, the shell companies with Lily's name, and then the audio. The recording she had captured days ago of David screaming at her, admitting to the reallocation of the mission funds. The sanctuary fell into a silence so profound, it felt like the world had stopped breathing. David turned, his face going ashen as he saw his own crimes projected 30 feet high. Emma stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at the man who had been her jailer. "It's over, David," she said, her voice carrying through the silent hall, clear and unwavering. "It's over." The police, alerted by Sarah, moved in from the back of the room. The transition from the chaos of the arrest to the stillness of her new life happened in a series of sharp, jagged memories. Months later, Emma sat in a small, sun-drenched apartment in a town 3 hours away. The furniture was modest. Plain wood, no velvet, no mahogany. The air smelled of coffee and lemon polish. In the corner, Lily sat with her cello, the bow moving across the strings in a deep, soulful melody. Emma leaned back in her chair, a cup of tea in her hands. The cup was plain white. It had a small chip on the rim, but she didn't mind. She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in 20 years, she breathed, the air filling her lungs without the weight of a secret. She was no longer the pastor's wife. She was simply Emma, and that was enough.